guys! Welcome back. Last video, I mentioned the new version of Mittalterland, which now looks like this. And what better way to start than the land itself? Now before I begin, I want to say that not only will I be using the Super 4 series for inspiration, I'll also be using Playmobil and real life. And I may or may not start roasting parts of the show along the way. Out of love, of course. And poops and chuckles. I'll be doing a bunch of science dumping here, but don't worry, most of it'll be in this video and referenced in others. So strap in, kids! Now, making the actual world of world building like geography and climates and stuff is really hard. There's a frick ton of factors to consider that affect many other factors and keep things running a certain way. It's a lot to keep track of. Thank God for channels like Artifection, although he goes into depth, to say the least. Good Lord. But in order for this series to premiere in this century, I'll try to keep things relatively simple. For me at least. Luckily, there's no exact guarantee that things will absolutely be one-to-one in fantasy and reality, so as long as it makes just enough sense, I can get away with it. Very luckily for me, the show was kind enough to provide an actual map of the world, or at least Kingsland's interpretation of it, and you better believe I'll be taking advantage of it throughout my process. And boy oh boy, there's some interesting implications with this layout. What immediately grabs my attention is that dang equator. Assuming this is even remotely based in Earth-like reality, and the wave is just stylistic, the Mittalterland should be very different from the temperate biome that it seems to be. The closer you get to the equator, the more sunlight you get, and generally more rainfall. A lot of rainfall. All that sun and water is just great for a little thing called foliage. That's why over on our Earth, the equator is wreathed with absolutely luscious rainforests. So the upper half of Mittalterland should look more like the Lost World than the Lost World. Especially this bit here and around this little bridge here. Now when you get further away from the equator, you may find plains not too far from it. One of the reasons is the rain shadow effect. It's where hot air picks up water from the sea, drops it as it rises on one side of a mountain, then sinks as it cools on the other side, now dry. All that lack of moisture prevents too many plants from growing in a certain region, but if it's severe enough or other factors are at play, you may get a full-on desert. Factors like Hadley cells. What the heck are those? Hadley cells are part of the Coriolis effect, which is just a fancy term to say how the Earth's rotation affects wind, putting it in cells across certain latitudes. Hadley cells have warm, wet air rising from the equator and northwards as cool air sinks and goes down south. It's completely reversed for Ferro cells, but goes back for polar cells. Note that the whole system is flipped in the southern hemisphere from the north. Hadley cells are where trade winds, also called easterlies, form, steering the flow of tropical storms. Well, you get the gist of it. They're a big deal, especially for the weather. Furthermore, Mittalterland is a big blocky continent. Yes, continent. Its sheer size and connection to another giant landmass qualifies it as such. So this means that it'll be hard for precipitation to make it to the center, leaving it with less vegetation. All of this means that both Kingsland and the Black Barony should probably be drier, especially with how mountainous the territory is. Oh, and there's also one little teeny tiny thing that concerns me. The freaking dragons! Oh, but they're all the way up there! Exactly. Listen to what Alex says about their territory.
What'd you expect? This is dragon territory. They breathe fire 24/7, so yes, it's hot.
This implies that the dragons breathe so much and so often that it altered the climate itself. The land too apparently, as there's not a single blade of foliage anywhere, which is really remarkable considering they're smack dab on the equator. The amount of sun seems accurate if Twinkle's complaints mean anything.
All this sunshine, it hurts my eyes.
So where's the rain? Could the dragons have possibly played a hand in that? I don't know. So what does this have to do with Kingsland? Look at the top of the map. There's a notable north wind there. The dragons are directly north, separated from Kingsland by a large body of water. Judging by the placement of the castle, mountains as well, Putting Hadley cells and rain shadows into the equation, Kingsland should absolutely, possibly, be a desert, or at least a shrubland. By the time the wind goes across the water and over the mountains, it should be dry as heck. Forget trees and shrubs, they'd be lucky to have grass at all. And for creatures that seem to love hot and dry spaces, they sure picked a horrible spot.
God damn!
All that heat going to the atmosphere, probably, takes the rainforest event and cranks it to 11 before breaking the knob off. It should be raining constantly over there, with a ton of plant life and probably biodiversity. This would actually really lend itself to Alex's mentioning of other dragons.
Troll saw fire dragon, water dragon. Did it have feathers, scales? Green dragon call. White dragon repellent fire.
Yeah.
Then we don't get to see. So there's that concept. Okay, with all that said, how does that at all apply to Mittalterland? Not at all. Or at least not entirely. I rearranged the continent and other islands from this to this, but I did keep some interesting features from them for their respective incarnations. We'll go into those when we get to them. Midavalia and the Nice theme as a whole takes obvious inspiration from medieval Europe, Germany specifically because, duh, they were made in Germany. So let's just copy and paste the stuff from there to here. Germany is smack dab in the northern temperate zone at about 51.5 degrees north. Being here allows Germany the luxury of all 4 traditional seasons, large crop and fruit variety, and way less weather extremes, which means they don't regularly suffer the indignities of swamplands and witch tits. However, they can still vary pretty heavily from year to year. One winter may be kinda chilly while the next may be more severe. Spring can come too early, summer be too warm and dry, and autumn may have drought. Then everything's reversed some other year. Another is the constant overcast clouds in the colder months, combined with lack of sun, which is just great for crops. Which leads me to rainfall. There's plenty of rainfall for the crops that Kingsland doesn't have. Where's your crops at? Where they at? I know you have them, Sir Garrett said so!
My king, those dragons have completely burned our fields.
Yeah. Anyway, the reason for the janky weather is the conflicting winds. There's a warm westerly wind from the southwest and a slightly cold easterly wind from the northeast, which has some pretty gnarly effects when they clash. Wind also affects ocean currents, which in turn affects rainfall. Ocean currents play a huge role in moving and containing heat. Warm currents raise the air's temperature, cold currents cool it. Their movements depend on a lot of things: continental edges, seabed formation, salinity, and of course, the old Coriolis effect. Okay, let's apply this to Mittalterland. We'll wisely start with the tectonic plates. Frick, I forgot! Okay, speedrun. Tectonic plates are those big old masses on the Earth's crust that like to slip and slide around, making mountains, causing earthquakes, breaking into littler plates, and meeting up to make newer ones. So it's very important to mind their edges or you'll end up like California or Japan. Just sketch some plates, make sure they line up on the globe, have them join up in T/Y shapes, and done. Phew! Okay, now we can go to Mittalterland for real. First up, shape and size, which is this and this. For those of you who wonder what this edge here is, it's the continental shelf, and this is important, so listen up. Don't confuse continental shelves with the continent's edge above water. Think of continents as colossal icebergs, and the part we're on is only the surface, when really they kind of slope out further underwater before dropping off as a steep cliff. This is how we're able to have beaches and tides. It's that underwater face that truly affects the currents whether or not there's a visible landmass. Moving on to location. Apparently 30 degrees to 90 degrees latitudinally north and longitudinally, I'm not sure. What I am sure about is that there's a warm current that flows northward on the west side of the continent until it weakens and clashes with a weakened cold current, and they both flow outward as a neutral current. The east side is weird. There's a cold current that flows southward and weakens, but due to certain underwater formations and the wonkiness of the coastlines, there's some funky mini-cells swirling around in addition to a neutral current flowing outward. As the gyres spin, the water takes time to change temperature, so they hang out here more, affecting the climate. No idea how accurate this all is, but frickin' suspension of disbelief will have to carry us. Okay, ocean currents, done. Now let's briefly map out our mountains, minding the plates. Side note, mountains can outlive where there used to be plate boundaries if enough time passes. Just thought I'd add that. Also remember, depending on their placement, they'll result in rain shadows that will affect whatever's on and beyond them. Going back to Mittalterland real quick, it has some really rugged terrain. Mountains, big boulders just chilling in the middle of nowhere, so let's carry that to Mittalterland. There's some really high and big mountains at the top of the continent, so their rain shadows extend pretty far, creating a wide area. Combine that with dry, cold, dense, high-pressured air from the northeast, thanks to the cold current on the other side of them, and you got a massive freaking tundra. Yet, upon further research, the size and placement of these mountains may actually prevent cold northern winds from traveling to the rest of the continent, making things a little less colder in the winter, which is a plus if true. Not only that, they're so high that there's massive glaciers that form at their summit. These glaciers slide down these mountains, break and melt, and create a buttload of tributaries and rivers that trickle down them and flow into lower places over the continent. And we're not talking about dainty little ice cubes on a frou-frou drink. We're talking about a king-size convenience store bag of that all lumped together to form a hive mind, dragging its raggedy posterior down a mountain's face, and it's just gonna have to deal with it. With some therapy, cause it gets messed up. As glaciers move, they scratch up the land something fearsome, leaving deep gashes and pockets where water can gather, creating a really patchy lakeland. If the glaciers erode for long enough, they may even create fjords and huge-ass lakes that might as well be seas. Of course, using a mountain range as a scratching post is gonna move some things around. The breeze move with the glaciers, sometimes filling up those pock marks over time. But like the roads in downtown Louisiana, it's pretty shoddy work. Potholes everywhere that collect water, turning into a swamp-like speckled marsh over here. It's not always little debris either. Remember those huge boulders that seemed like they were dropped off somewhere? That's because they very well could have been. When an absolutely massive, like legit, a continent on top of a continent-sized glacier forms on a landmass, they take entire chunks of mountains along for the ride. They roll around, smooth out, and are dropped somewhere random as the glacier moves on. These are called erratics, and Kingsland has some huge ones. We got huge mountains, so let's add some to Mittalterland. Other shorter mountains and hills will either lead to areas like plains or have no noticeable impact at all. Okay, what do we have so far? Wind patterns, ocean currents, tectonic plates, mountain placement, continental shelf. That's a lot so far. Let's move on to rivers. I was surprised that the Kingsland map bothered to include rivers, so might as well take advantage of it for now. Rivers don't necessarily always start on mountains. They and tributaries start wherever there's high enough places where water can gather and flow down the easiest path. So we can plan a few more while we're at it. They can be absolutely vital, especially in areas with little to no precipitation. Just ask Egypt. So they will play a hand on where people choose to live. Rivers come in all kinds of cool shapes, speeds, and types, depending on where they travel and how old they are. Generally speaking, deeper rivers are younger and faster, older ones are wider and shallower. The softer a riverbed, the easier and more varied it'll be carved. All of this makes rivers prone to change, which makes any borders depending on them challenging. Good luck with that, guys. Finally, rivers empty out to sea as deltas depending on the currents. Important note, because I know someone will bring it up. Rivers do not split outside of really rare circumstances. Instead, they usually meet up to form bigger ones or in lakes where they enter a game match. Many games, one will lead. There's a bunch of other stuff. Underground rivers, rivers that empty into inland basins, rivers that cut through mountains, and way more. Again, if you're really curious about this stuff, Artifection is your guide, along with channels like Stoneworks and World Building Corner. Okay guys, I think that's a lot of stuff that we've just tackled in this video. I guess we can wrap it up and... Oh... Wait... The dragons. Frick. Yep, they're right there. Man, we gotta address them. I mean, they really do play a hand in this. They played a hand in the original Mittalterland, and since they're here, they're most certainly gonna start affecting things. Okay, how the heck are we even gonna plan for this? Let's just do it. Yep, they're right there. You know, I was gonna keep the desert aspect, but since I've talked about the rainforest dragon territory, it's grown on me. So I kinda combined the two things. Now, we're gonna have to do some hand waving here more than usually because we're talking about fictional creatures affecting a whole climate. So, I'm gonna have to take some liberties. They live in deep valleys and ravines between two high mountain chains. One takes impact from the westerly wind, creating a rain shadow in the gap. But rivers and tributaries flow down it, creating large bodies of water where the heat of their fire causes them to evaporate, repeating the rain shadow process on the other mountain. No idea if this is even remotely plausible, but there's already dragons, so frick it. The second rain shadow carries over to the mainland, but is toned down slightly by the small channel separating the land masses, creating sparse shrubbery and plains. Occasionally, dragons will prowl here looking for food, with a few smaller ones living there. And we're just going to leave that there for now, because then that starts going into world building in the cultural sense. And that's it for now, guys. I'm sorry if you were expecting the actual kingdom of Sicherberg or something like that for this video, but you really can't underestimate the consequences the literal world has on your world. Just by keeping track of all of this has opened new ideas for adventures, so please keep hanging on as I have. Way more to go. God help me. Psst. Hey, also find me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and my own personal website. I have a challenge every September called Super 4 Burr. And Lucky Charms if you're into that. It's weird, but anyway, bye.